This is a production of Cornell University.
Welcome to Man Library's Chats in the Stacks book talk series. Human nutrition expert and author of the critically acclaimed What to Eat, Marion Nestle, PhD, MPH, has joined forces with Cornell animal nutrition expert Malden C. Nesheim to write Feed Your Pet Right, the first complete research-based guide to selecting the best, most healthful foods for your cat or dog. In a book talk at Man Library on February 10, 2011, the authors presented highlights from their comprehensive look at the science behind pet food and the current trends in the booming pet food industry and its marketing practices. As a roadmap to the most nutritious diets for cats and dogs, Feed Your Pet Right is sure to be a reference classic for pet owners for years to come.
Well, thank you very much for the kind invitation, and thank you all for coming. Mal and I thought that the way we would do this is that I would start out by explaining how we happened to write a book about pet food. And then I'll talk about the process, and he'll talk about what the book actually discovered. I should say, since I don't know everybody here, that my own work is in food systems, and I'm particularly interested in the relationship between agriculture, food, nutrition, and public health, and the way those are integrated. And the book that probably exemplifies my work more than anything else is a book called Food Politics that came out in 2002. And in 2006, I wrote a book for the general public called What to Eat. That was really a book about not so much what to eat as how to think about what to eating. And I did much of the work, the research for that book in supermarkets, most notably the Wegmans in Ithaca. And Mal was helping me with that research. And we would go to Wegmans a lot and go up and down the aisles. And What to Eat is a book that kind of talks about food issues. Every issue or question you might possibly have about foods, using a supermarket as an organizing device. I just went aisle by aisle through the supermarket and talked about all the issues that came up about vegetables or meat or dairy or whatever. And while we were spending all this time in Wegmans and other places, it was perfectly obvious that there was really an enormous, enormous aisle in that supermarket for pet food. And this was in 2006, and that's a photograph of Wegmans' pet food aisle at the time. That entire aisle, which is 180 feet long, in case you ever counted, one side of it was cat food and one side of it is dog food. It's interesting that since then, they're using their own store brand much more, and they've cut down a lot of the space for pet food. But we were stunned by the amount of space that was devoted to pet food, because it was 1/7 of the packaged foods in the Ithaca Wegmans, and that is a lot of supermarket real estate. We knew by then that foods in supermarkets are not there randomly, they're paid for by companies, and it was clear that a great deal of investment was going into selling pet food at supermarkets, and it was something that I didn't know anything about. I would pick up these cans or packages, and I couldn't read the labels. I just couldn't understand what they said. They don't look like human food labels. They didn't make any sense to me. But Mel would pick them up and say, oh yeah, this means this, and this means that, and this means that, because he was trained in animal nutrition, and they're feed labels, and so he knew how to read animal feed labels. And I thought after What to Eat came out, and it didn't cover pet food, and I kind of regretted that, and I regretted it even more when people started coming up and saying, you need to do something about explaining pet food because we can't make sense of it. And the kinds of questions that people had asked me about human food that What to Eat was designed to answer, people were asking me exactly the same kind of questions about pet food. So I spent a long time trying to convince Mal to do this book with me. I figured this would be a great team. I already knew we could write together without killing each other, and that it would be kind of fun. And that was exactly what we did. So we also, one of the ways in which I convinced him was by going out to bookstores and looking at the kind of books about pet feeding that were out there. And it was clear that we could do better than that, or at least we thought we could do better than that, mainly because the books that were out there seemed to us to be extraordinarily biased and not particularly science-based. So people had some ideas about what you should feed cats and dogs, and they wrote books based on those ideas with very, very little research behind it. And we were pretty sure there was a lot of research about pet food. If we made one really gross error going into this, it was thinking that there was going to be a lot of research. As it turned out, there wasn't so much. But we thought we could write a scientifically based book about pet food and try to do it in a pretty sober and thoughtful way, and that would be a useful contribution. So in February 2007, we had a book proposal out, and we got a contract to write a book called What Pets Eat, based on what to eat. I will spare you the gory details of the publishing crisis that occurred right afterwards, and it was a while before everything got published. But we had a contract, and we got that contract in February 2007, and 3 weeks later, the FDA announced that an enormous recall of pet food that had been made by a company in Canada called Menu Foods because of some poison in the food that was killing cats and dogs. And this was obviously huge because Menu Food turns out to be a company, a contract company, that made 95 different brands of pet food. So the first big shock was that all pet foods are made at the same place. Or, to put it another way, all pet foods are practically identical. So that was kind of interesting and informed our research. And and it also got us sort of curious about melamine. Mal had some memories about melamine from his work in animal nutrition, and we found ourselves delving into the veterinary library's collection of books of articles about melamine going back to the 1960s. And the result of that was we published a little letter, our first veterinary publication. We had a letter in the Journal of the American Veterinary Association at the end of that year talking about our discoveries about melamine and our quantitative suggestions about how much melamine it would take to kill a cat or a dog. It turned out it was pretty easy to make some guesses about that. And I have to say I got completely distracted by the melamine recall, because I'm very interested in food safety. I have a book out about food safety. And this was a classic situation of a failure in federal oversight of food safety. And I thought that if the food system didn't protect cats and dogs from having this poison melamine put into their food products, then it was probably going to affect people as well, and that it ought to be taken really, really seriously, instead of people just saying, oh, it's just cats and dogs and we don't have to worry about it. So I got so distracted that I wrote a piece that was meant to be an appendix for our book, but it got way out of hand, and University of California Press published it as a separate book in 2008 called Pet Food Politics. It was about the melamine recalls. And it came out in July 2008, and in September that year was when they found melamine in infant formula in China that was responsible for at least 350,000 cases of infant kidney problems and some deaths, and melamine is still a very serious problem in Chinese food. So I felt like I was somebody who had brilliantly predicted something. I wish I had been wrong. In any case, if we go back to February or March 2007, when the melamine recalls were announced, I was interviewed by the New York Times about the food safety aspects of pet food, and there was a little piece in that article that said that Mal and I were writing a book about pet food that would optimistically come out next year. As it turned out, it was 2 years after that. But lots of people saw that. And as a result of that, we started getting deluged with requests to speak about pet food, with secret documents, with all kinds of amazing information that we probably wouldn't have had access to otherwise. We were invited to be on the board of editors of Bark magazine and started writing for them. As a result of that, we got press credentials, and those press credentials took us to industry conferences and trade shows that we wouldn't have had access to otherwise. And a lot of the book, besides the usual way in which you do books, where you do a lot of research and talking to people, much of the talking to people that we were able to do occurred as a result of our press access to a lot of different places. We also tried very hard to get into pet food manufacturing plants and various kinds of industry production. That's a long story in itself. Mal actually got into a few, but mostly we were turned down whenever we tried to do that. So we ended up writing a book that kind of answered questions and solved and kind of addressed our own curiosity about what pet food was about. I started knowing absolutely nothing about it, and I had lots of questions, one of which was, what on earth did pets eat before there was commercial pet food? Somehow dogs and cats survived. How did they do that? So we have a chapter about that, several chapters about that. Because of my own interest in food politics, I was particularly interested in what the pet food industry was about. The pet food industry is an industry that generates $18 billion a year in the United States alone. And it's overall pets are about a 45 to 50 billion a year industry. This is a huge, huge, huge industry with a lot of money at stake. So we were really interested in who made the pet food, because we already knew that one company made 95 different brands. Who else made it? How did they make it? We were very curious about that. We wanted to know what was in it. We had read a lot of books about all the poisons that were in pet food, and we were really curious to know how it was made. So we did a big analysis of the ingredients that are in there. And again, because of my own interest in food politics, I was very concerned about the regulation of pet food, and we ended up spending a lot of time trying to figure out the complicated regulatory system that involves state and federal feed control officials, the FDA, and the FDA's Center for Veterinary Medicine. We ended up thinking that the regulatory system, which everybody in the industry thinks works just fine, maybe didn't work as fine as they thought it did. So that was, and then the whole business about figuring out what's on the label. The labels are immensely complicated. Deconstructing them was a very difficult task. There are all kinds of rules and regulations that they may or may not follow, and we spend quite a bit of time in the book trying to talk about that. We also talk about what the various products are. There are just the most amazing line extensions in different kinds of products that are out on the market. We had this suspicious all along that all pet foods are really pretty much alike. They're like baby food. From a nutritional standpoint, they all have to meet the same standards. And so we were very, very curious about the distinctions in the products and whether you could really tell whether one product was better than another by reading its label. And we wondered about whether you could believe the marketing. Here we felt like we were on very comfortable ground because I spend a lot of my time analyzing the marketing of human foods. And the pet food looked remarkably similar. The issues seemed really, really very, very much the same. And then we knew that there were a lot of people who were feeding only raw foods. There were a lot of people who thought that you were going to kill your pet unless you did your own home cooking. And so the book also deals with all of those kinds of questions. And then because we're academics, it comes with a lot of scholarly apparatus. It's got lots of tables and figures. It's got a timeline of events in the history of pet food. We have a very, very nice piece about the history of pet food regulation that nobody but us is interested in. It's in an appendix. We've got lists of resources and 1 million footnotes. So it's a very scholarly and well-researched book. I have to say, we had a lot of fun writing it. And then the reaction to it has been interesting. We were thrilled to see a couple of weeks ago that Pet Food Industry, the industry magazine for the pet food industry, which we assumed would absolutely hate the book because we're a little critical of it, to say the least, actually gave it a really, really nice review. The review was headlined, "Why You Should Read This Book." We thought that was nice. And then this kind of, it's a little iffy statement, but compared to the other books that are out there, those ones we looked at the beginning, this one is refreshingly candid. Okay, but strives to be balanced and fair. I would have liked it better if it hadn't said strives. I thought we were balanced and fair. On the other hand, we got absolutely killed on Amazon.com. The Amazon.com first review, and it's still the one that's that's up there, said, Marion Nestle is a human nutritionist who endorses fresh whole foods for people and criticizes processed junk foods. Her advice to pet owners is much less healthy. For this book, Marion Nestle teamed up with Malden Nesheim, a veterinary nutritionist by training, not exactly. He seems to have led Nestle woefully astray. So I now introduce to you the man who led me astray, Mal Nesheim.
So what can I say? 50 lashes with a wet noodle, I guess. Yes. Well, as Marion said, we had a lot of fun doing this book. I started out here, as you mentioned, as a professor of animal nutrition. I was in the poultry department for many years. I used to teach an animal science course in animal nutrition to animal science majors, and then I went over to Savage Hall and became director of nutritional sciences, and so I started getting from two-legged chickens to two-legged people and dealt with nutrition issues there for a long time. And so when Marion kind of pulled me back into the animal nutrition field, I had a lot of fun. It was really interesting to go back and renew some of the things that I knew, impress Marion with what I knew about some of these things, and to do this book. So let me just tell you a little bit about some of the things that are in it. This is the cover, of course, you've seen it. And Marion said that we got in trouble because we didn't endorse a particular point of view about feeding pet foods. And people eat in many different ways. If you look at all the different human cuisines that are out there, there's an enormous number of them. And our view of the pet food situation and reviewing research and reviewing everything is, there isn't one way that you can feed a pet. You can feed a pet a lot of different ways. And it's going to depend a lot on your own lifestyle, and it's going to depend on a lot of your own ideology as to how to do it. So, home cooking, there's a lot of people who feel that they want to cook for their pets, and a lot of people do, and we think that's fine. We talk about it in the book, and we give some generic recipes on which one can do it. Interestingly enough, you find a lot of publications, veterinary publications particularly from the pet food industry, that says you're going to kill your pet if you cook for it at home. So be very careful. And it's really not all that bad. If you can cook for yourself, we think you can cook for your pet. Commercial pet food. Again, probably 80 or 90% of the pets in this country are, in fact, commercial pet food. There's an awful lot of people who have a dog or a cat really like to go to the store and pick up a bag of something, bring it home, look at the directions on the package, and give it to their animal and hope that it's going to be, and if the animal eats it and is happy about it, they're very happy to do that. And so they probably are not the ones who were particularly interested in our book, because they've been relatively happy with doing things. And then there's people who feel the only way to feed pets is to feed them raw food. I mean, they were absolutely, this whole kind of evolutionary idea that dogs and cats grew up as wild animals and that their food was from hunting and it was raw. And that's really the way that you can make them healthy, is to feeding them raw diets. And that's the group that really got after us with this book and told me that I'd led Marion astray, because this was a raw feeder who wrote that review, but there is some very strong feelings out there about what you should be doing in terms of feeding your pet, and so that's clear. The other thing that we found out is that Marion mentioned that pet foods are kind of like baby formula. The regulatory issues here are such that the Association of Feed Control Officials has a set of standards that you have to follow in terms of nutrient content, so that the amount of certain nutrients that are in the food has to meet a profile that they've published in terms of what the food should have. So in that sense, it's like, as Marion mentioned, it's like baby food. There's a nutritional profile that has to be met. So from that point of view, you can say that these pet foods are all very much the same in terms of their nutrient profile. And so it's not what pet food companies have to do is to differentiate their foods on the basis of the source of these nutrients, on the basis of the ingredients that they're using, and how they go beyond the specifications that have to be in there. So that helps differentiate. And the other thing is that there's a set of pet foods out there that we call alternative pet foods, and that includes includes the raw feeding, but it also includes things like their kosher pet foods. I mean, this is about your values, about your own values, and you want to transfer those values from yourself to your pet. And so if you're a vegetarian, there are vegetarian formulas that you can feed your dogs and cats vegetarian food. If you think that dogs and cats shouldn't eat grains, you can find grain-free pet foods. There's different wild animals. You can get them made up of venison or buffalo or whatever. But so there's lots of different pet foods on the market that have a niche in terms of providing an outlet for people's values in terms of how they feel their animal should be fed. And we talk about that in the book. A big issue about what's in pet foods are rendered byproducts. Most of the things that are in pet foods really are byproducts of the human feeding. And one of the big ones, of course, are the byproducts from meat packing. There's an enormous amount of offal and guts and livers and kidneys and things like that are produced when we slaughter all the cattle that we produce in this country, or chickens or pigs. There's a huge industry that produces what is called, and most of this is taken and sent to a rendering plant where it is cooked and dried and made into a meal that is a high protein meal that is used for animal feeding. So things like poultry byproduct meal and meat meal and so forth are a huge amount of material that are produced in this country. We gave some advice to the rendering industry in a talk we gave to the Pet Food Forum, and that's where this slide came from. But, there's a book that Ann Martin wrote about food that pets die for, and she was made the issue that a lot of this rendered material has got rendered pets in it. So if you've got a dog and you're feeding it and has meat meal in it, well, a lot of the meat that goes into this rendered stuff actually comes from rendered pets, because there's a huge number of pets that have to be disposed of in this country every year. Anybody who's following the Ithaca Journal knows the vet college has had all this trouble of trying to deal with the waste and the animal that come from the veterinary college. So Ann Martin wrote this book and said that this stuff is full of roadkill, it's full of diseased animals, full of pet carcasses and so forth. And well, we said to the rendering industry, you better make sure that that's not true, and you better develop some products that clearly certify that. But we didn't find any evidence for it, and that's one of the things we tried to do. We tried to go through and say, well, really, how much of this stuff really is in pet foods? And it turns out that at one time there probably was a certain amount of that. One of the things that was fun with this is we researched a lot of different stories about this, and it turns out back in the 90s in St. Louis, some television program had a television camera on a truck that was rendering. It was from a rendering works in St. Louis. It was taking animals into the rendering works to be rendered, and it had on the side of the truck the truck, "We feed your pets." and the television cameras got a hold of that, and all hell broke loose in St. Louis. And St. Louis stopped sending. The rendering company said they got into much trouble over it. They refused to take any more pets from the pound or veterinary practices or anything like that in St. Louis. So St. Louis had several, what are we going to do with all these animals? And they eventually sent them to a landfill until they built a big incinerator in St. Louis, and they took care of it. And so we started really looking to see whether or not, whether we could find out where pet carcasses were sent after they came out of pounds and so forth, where they were euthanized. The FDA did some studies in looking at whether they could detect DNA from pets in meat meals. They took a whole lot of samples of meat meals, and they sampled it and looked to see if they could find pet DNA in it, and they said they could not. We asked a friend of ours who's a health commissioner in one of the counties in California that has a lot of pets to be disposed of, and we asked him, well, what happens to the pets that are, he says, well, I contract with Cofan Industries, and they come with their trucks and pick them up, and when they leave the county, I haven't a clue what happens to them. So we went to Cofan Industries, and we talked to them, and they said, well, they have incinerators, and they have landfills, and they said they send their pets to the incinerators. Now, so we haven't been able to show, to demonstrate that there's a lot of pets that are still in some of these rendered byproducts, but nevertheless, it's an issue out there that a lot of people are concerned about. And also, it's also true now that a lot of companies now have contracts and get their rendered things like poultry byproduct meal and so forth from very specific plants and very specific situations. The rendering industry feels they're very responsible about this, but we think they should be much more, they should find a way in which the public can be a little bit more comfortable about this. We gave advice to the pet food industry in the book. We say that we found cases where they weren't really adhering to EFCO and FDA guidelines, and the whole issue of transparency was there. Marion mentioned that we tried to get to see certain manufacturing facilities or research facilities, and we got a mixed reception. There was, I spent a week with the Hills Company in Kansas, where they brought in a bunch of veterinarians that they do all the time, bring them in and show them their research facilities, tell them about what they're doing, and take them through their plant. And I was able to do that and get a picture of the kind of things that the company did with that. We tried to get into the Ralston Purina research facilities, and they wouldn't let us near the place, nor would EAMS let us near the place. On the other hand, Waltham, or Mars, which has a big facility in England, invited us to come to see their facility there, which we did. And I got into some private, there's a pet food over in Shenango, New York, that a pet food mill there that makes contract pet foods for lots of different people. It's one mill, and you see brands from a whole lot of people that they make in there. And they took us through. It turns out that he happened to be, one of the owners of that mill happened to be an undergraduate advisee of mine when he was an undergraduate here at Cornell. So that helped getting him in. So, and then of course Marion talked about safety systems. And then we were also surprised about the research issues now with pet foods. Years ago, there used to be a lot of research going on with dogs and cats, particularly dogs. I mean, the early work in nutrition was done with dogs as experimental animals. And Clive McKay, who was a professor here in animal science for many, many years, had a big dog colony in that barn that's out near the Laboratory for Ornithology. That was the dog barn when I first came around here. And he carried out lots of different research with dogs in that. They had a beagle colony, had a very large beagle colony, and he carried out a lot of research in that with beagles. And well, things have changed, of course, over the years. The rules for how you can house pets and the kind of facilities that you need to have certainly would make that barn completely unacceptable to do this kind of thing today. And what you have today are mainly, and so you don't find many universities that have these kind of facilities that can carry on fairly large-scale research with dogs and cats. University of California, Davis has a big cat facility that they do quite a lot of work on. But these university facilities for doing substantial work on nutrition of dogs and cats have kind of disappeared for some of the kind of reasons there. The facilities are very expensive and they take a lot of time. Whereas pet food companies like Mars have these absolutely fantastic facilities where they've got individuals, dogs practically have their own individual caretakers within the facility, and because they're so concerned about the issues of animal rights and people who are concerned about animal research, that they have gone overboard to try to make these facilities really, really good and plush. So we see the contrast of that in this. And we talked a bit about veterinary colleges. We tried to find out how much instruction was in veterinary colleges about nutrition. And it was really a mixed bag. I mean, some veterinary colleges have required courses in nutrition. Some have elective courses. Some have no courses at all. Some of them get their instruction largely from people coming from a pet food company that will spend a couple of weeks with their students. It's a really mixed bag. And so we also found cases where there was sponsored research in a veterinary college. It wasn't at Cornell, but it was at another veterinary college where the pet food company sponsored the research and they couldn't publish the research. We found the kind of research situation around dog and cat nutrition today kind of a mixed bag. Pet food companies do a lot to try to influence veterinary students. I mean, veterinary students practically around the world get free pet food as long as they're veterinary students from some pet food company. This was at Cornell where Hills was distributing pet food to veterinary students. A number of other schools will take it and sell it they'll get the pet food and then they'll sell it at a discount and use it to support activities of their veterinary student associations and so forth. So but practically everybody does this, not just in the United States, but our friends in Australia and South Africa and England, the same thing happens. So we found there was not very much discussion about this issue of industry influence on veterinary education. Our students, and some of you might be veterinary students here at Cornell, at one time at least, you were in the fall, you would get backpacks and you would get meals and you would get lots of things from various pet food companies, which they're trying to be nice to you because they hope you'll be nice to them eventually someday. And medical schools have tried to confront this in recent years, and they've had a lot of discussion about policies that talk about gifts from industry to physicians and students and so forth, but we found there was very little discussion of that in veterinary colleges, and I talked to a lot of associate deans around the country about this issue, and they said, well, you know, veterinary schools are not supported all that well, not like medical schools are, and this helps us a lot in trying to have some various programs and so forth, and they say we really don't have much choice but to try to kind of work with this. And they say we try to let people know, we try to be open about it so that it's not hidden that this is happening, and that's the way they try to deal with it. So the other thing we get asked about when we do these talks is, how about your pets? And I have to say, at the moment, neither one of Mary and I are living with a pet, but these are my grandpets. So I think I'll stop there. Just want to say, I'll echo what Marion said. We had a good time kind of putting our foot into this whole area. We had a lot of fun working together to write the book, and we found we could do that, and so now we're writing a book about calories. So, yes.
This has been a production of Cornell University. On the web at cornell.edu.